Welcome to A Year in the Bible with Daily Grace. My name is Kristen.
And my name is Katie. And we want to spend a few minutes a day with you walking through the New Testament, one chapter at a time. This year, we will fix our gaze upon Christ so that we may know him, not only with our minds, but with our hearts.
Together, we will learn that who Jesus is changes everything. Welcome back to A Year in the Bible with Daily Grace. My name is Kristen Schmucker, and we are in Luke 20 today. As a reminder, I'm using the Behold studies from the Daily Grace Go, as well as the free reading plan, and you can find all the information about those in the show notes. Jesus has been making some very bold statements as he taught, and the chief priests, scribes, and elders came to him to ask what authority he spoke with. They wanted to know who gave Jesus the right to preach the way that he did. Instead of answering their question directly, Jesus responded with a question of his own. He asked them if John's baptism was from heaven or of human origin. The leaders knew that they would be in trouble no matter how they answered that question, so they refused to answer him, and so Jesus beat them at their own game and refused to answer the question that they had asked of him. On the heels of that interaction, we have the parable of the vineyard owner. In this parable, Jesus shows clearly who he is. This parable uses language that would have been very familiar to the people of Israel. We are introduced to a man who planted a vineyard. This was common Old Testament language, as Israel was often referred to as a vineyard, and God was the one who had planted this vineyard. This language appears most notably in Isaiah 5, but also in places like Psalm 80 and Jeremiah 2. The people knew this metaphor well, and the temple even had been engraved with grapevines on its walls. The tenant farmers give us a picture of the religious leaders, and the servants that were sent were pictures for us of the prophets. Sadly, the prophets that God had sent were rejected and even beaten for the message that they proclaimed. When the servants were rejected, the man sent his beloved son. All of a sudden, this parable hits our hearts as we realize what is happening here. This is Jesus. He is the beloved Son of the Father. These words from the Father had rang out from heaven in his baptism and at the Transfiguration. Yet when the farmers saw the Son, they did not listen to him. Instead, they plotted to kill him. Verse 19 tells us that the scribes and chief priests knew that he was talking about them. But their hardened hearts would not be softened, and they were becoming more resolute in their plan to kill him. The religious leaders continued to try to trap him and even sent spies to wait for the right moment to hand him over to the government. When they asked him about Caesar, it seemed they were trying to get him to say something that would convince the Roman officials that he needed to die. But Jesus stunned them all to silence with his winsome answers. We have talked a lot about Pharisees, and in this next passage we encounter the Sadducees. They were a religious group similar to the Pharisees, but their defining marker was that they did not believe in the resurrection. This was an elite group of those in the upper class. In a way, the Pharisees and Sadducees were like opposing political parties. Their disbelief in resurrection or life after death is essential for us to understand what is happening here, because they were asking questions about something they did not believe in at all. They pulled a passage from the law and used an extreme and ridiculous example to try to discredit the belief in resurrection. They were trying to trap Jesus. They ask about a woman who is married and her husband dies, and then they make up an elaborate scenario in which she marries the brothers. One after another, they die until she has married 7 of them. The question is, whose wife will she be in the resurrection? Jesus responds that in the resurrection, people will neither marry nor are they given in marriage. And he says that God is the God of the living and not the dead. Some scholars take this to mean that there is no marriage in heaven, though they often disagree on the specifics of what that means, and others take this to mean that there are no new marriages in heaven. Regardless of what it means, we can know that there are no tears or sadness in heaven, so we will be perfectly content in God's plan. Jesus was not shaken by their schemes against him. Instead, he reminds them that God is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the God of the living and not the dead. These religious leaders were trying their best to trap him, but Jesus had his own questions about how the Messiah could be both David's son and David's Lord. The question was leading to the understanding that Jesus himself was the one that David spoke of, and that he was both fully God and fully man. But the chapter closes with a warning against the scribes. They love to look religious and like they were doing all the right things, but their hearts were wicked and they did not care for the people entrusted to them. As we make our way toward the cross, we behold Jesus as the beloved Son who has come for our salvation. We see him as the cornerstone who would be rejected by the ones who should have embraced him. We see him as the one who has all authority. We behold him as the God of the living and the God who meets us in our need. We see him as fully God and fully man, the Son of David and the Lord of all. We see him as the one who is worthy of our worship, adoration, and every part of our lives.
Thank you so much for listening to today's episode of A Year in the Bible with Daily Grace. Don't forget to check out the show notes for helpful links and resources related to today's episode. And make sure you are following at Daily Grace Podcast on Instagram for more A Year in the Bible content, and at the Daily Grace Co. for all things Bible study resources. We can't wait to study again with you tomorrow. Bye, friends.